Thank you for coming along today to the City Circle event, the Green Up, Speak Up. Could I just ask the people at the back, the regulars, to come to the front, please? I think both the speakers are quite keen to make it a bit more interactive, so hopefully there'll be a bit of participation and lots of Q&A. Global warming doesn't mean we all have warmer weather in the future. There will be more extreme and unpredictable weather across the world. Many places will be hotter, some colder, some wetter and others drier. The global scientific community has warned us for years on the impact of climate change as a result of fossil fuel use. But why does the threat of climate change produce apathy, not action? With so much at stake, why do people fail to act? City Circle's been running for almost 16 years now, and I think we've done climate change a few times, and unfortunately it's one of the topics where you don't always get the biggest attendance, and that's something that we're trying to change. And with us today we have two activists and campaigners that are going to share with us their story, their journey through campaigning, the different campaigns that they're working on, and then they're going to inspire us with a bit of poetry and spoken word. The format for today is they're both going to speak for roughly 8 to 10 minutes, and followed by some Q&A. Hopefully we'll get a lot of questions from you guys today. So the first speaker today is Shehroze, who graduated from the University of Nottingham in 2013 with a BSc in mathematics. He has always had an avid interest in social and political affairs and been on a number of leadership programs. He has been involved in a number of campaigns centered on identity, representation, including the Student-Run Islamic Society, the VME movement, and the campaigns against Islamophobia. He is currently campaigns manager at Made in Europe, a growing NGO equipping young people with skills required for change, making advocacy and campaigning, and a rising star. That wasn't on the bio, that's just my prediction. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Shehroze.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Peace be upon you all. How's everyone? Very good to hear. So like Rami said, what I'm quite keen to do is actually to turn this into an interactive discussion. So I'm going to try and talk for as short a time as possible. And then hopefully we can kind of hear more from the floor and really hear everyone else's opinions rather than just kind of listening to my own voice. So like Rami said, I'm working with Made in Europe. What I'm going to try and do in my introduction is actually tell you a bit about the context in which Made in Europe came to fruition as an organization, the need for it in the Muslim community, and hopefully what we're going to do taking it from there. And then I'm going to presuppose that most people in the room kind of know what global warming is or what climate change is. But in the question and answer, feel free to kind of ask any questions about Islam's relation with climate change. Why should we care about climate change? Those kinds of questions. So it's not that I'm an expert, but I think it's important to actually get those things out in the air. But those are some things, some assumptions that I'm going to presuppose. So let me just start off by talking about Made in Europe a little bit. So the Muslim community, it's probably something you read about in the papers quite a lot under different circumstances and different contexts. So usually when we talk as Muslims about the Islamic contribution to society, oftentimes we go back about 1,000 years and talk about Andalusia. We talk about the Golden Age, we talk about our contributions to science and physics and algebra and chemistry. You might have heard many times that alchemia, that's where alchemy comes from. And it is quite amazing. We were in an amazing situation as a global ummah, which is, it's certainly something that happened in the past. But perhaps it's something that we, kind of talk about too much when we talk about our contribution to society, rather than talking about what our present contribution is and what our future contribution can be. So, although it's an unbelievable time, what made that time special is that lots of these contributions were inspired by the faith themselves. So if you read the original texts of some of the astronomy books, they'll start in the same way that the exegesis books, the tafsir books will start. They'll start Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, as-salatu was-salam ala Rasul al-Kareem. It'll, in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, praise be upon his messenger, and this is a science textbook. So very much lots of these things originated from the faith. But right now, if we're going to look at the British Muslim context, right, in Britain, you might see a disproportionate number of, let's say we're about 3% of the population. One thing that you'll see is a lot of doctors, almost like a disproportionate number of doctors in the community, which is great. That's really, really good. In fact, I know that most Muslim mothers, their dreams are for their children to be doctors, and that's amazing. But then you might also hear, and you don't really hear about that too much maybe, but something that I've read in the papers many times is that there's a disproportionate number of Muslim prison inmates. And that, kind of sucks. But if we're going to look at the socio-economic context under which lots of the kind of immigrants came to the country, perhaps it's not that surprising. But although our contribution to scientific progress, maybe that's not something that is blatantly spoken about too much these days. If we look at the contribution to the development sector as a whole, I think that's something that the Muslim community can actually speak about. So just recently, in an article, Muslims were cited as the highest charity donors within the whole of the UK. Now, what that shows about the community is that there's not a lack of generosity. Beyond that, there is this kind of willingness to help and a willingness to, kind of do what you can to make a change. But unfortunately, a few years ago, what we felt is that it ends over there. So there's almost this mentality of kind of throwing money at a problem. And that helps sometimes in the sense that there's a lot of charities doing great work. There's a lot of international aid. The majority of Muslims, and they're the highest donors in the UK, their money goes to aid, disaster relief, conflict situations. And it's because of the situations in lots of Muslim majority countries. And so it's really important that there's help and aid in these countries. But going beyond that, looking at charity from a wider definition, we felt that this was kind of missing within the Muslim community, and that there was a big gap over there, particularly when it came to more of the long-term solutions. So for example, if you've got your average, either your mosque goer or your average kind of good Samaritan who wants to make a difference, they have the choice between kind of giving some money, which is really important, but then it's taking that step further and internalizing a change themselves so that they can affect change within their own communities. And so this is the niche that we really saw, and this is what we really wanted to affect. So inspired by the Quranic verse, Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change themselves. A team came together to form Made in Europe, a very small team. So just to introduce Made in Europe, that's the organization I work for. We're a campaigning organization. Our goal is really to empower the next generation of young Muslims to lead the change against global poverty and social injustice by equipping them with the skills, by educating the community, and by actually campaigning to put the changes in place ourselves. So the Muslim development sector, it's massive. There's roughly, within the Muslim registered charities, about £100 million being turned over every year. That's a significant contribution, and that's something that we really need to harness. Like I said, a large portion of this does go to aid, again, which is essential. But what that shows is that there's this gap in the community, and this almost need to kind of come up with these long-term solutions. And it's not just that, it's also about the issues that are being spoken about. So, for example, one of Made's first campaigns was a campaign called At Our Mother's Feet. This was a campaign looking at maternal health and the amount of mothers who actually die during pregnancy and childbirth. Now, the thing is, within the Muslim community, or the Muslim charity sector, this wasn't really something that was being discussed or talked about. And it was almost seen as cultural taboo in lots of societies. But you know, one thing that Made aimed to do was to actually kind of raise awareness of this issue, to get people talking about the issue, to actually go to NGOs and charities that are working in these countries to actually start up more maternal health projects and to build up their capacity and to train them on running these kinds of projects. So if you look at us as an organization, it might be very different from what you kind of think about when you think of the regular charity. So we're very much a campaigning and educational based organization, but there's a big need for this, and particularly a big need for this in the Muslim community. So when I talk about long-term solutions, let me give you an example of one of the campaigns that we're running. It's called Buy Palestinian. Now, this is obviously a trade justice campaign to look at kind of fair trade within the West Bank and the Palestinian regions. One thing that we've seen is a lot of boycott campaigns. And the thing is, at the end of the day, that's just one side of it. Because in the long term, if everyone's going to boycott settlement goods or Israeli goods, for example, it's going to have a long-term impact on the economy of the Palestinians who, you know, we're trying to support as well. So the solution to that is really creating a market for Palestinian products where that market doesn't exist. And we're in complete control of that, being in the West. You know, the influence that we have in this country sitting here is far more than the influence that you might have sitting within the actual conflict zone. And so it's to raise awareness of those kinds of issues within the community and to show us that our consumer choices actually make a big difference. So the campaign that I'm leading on, and the topic of tonight, is climate change. The name of the campaign is called Green Up My Community. And it's very much to raise awareness of environmental sustainability in the Muslim community, to turn this into a mainstream household issue, and you know, to hopefully make sure that in the future, you know, Muslims are the people who are leading on these issues, but to get there, that, you know, Muslims really realize it's an active part of their faith, and it's an important part of contributing to society, because this is an issue that's affecting all of us. And it is soon to become one of the most pressing issues of our time. So again, I can speak about this more. I'm just going to end by saying a few small points. One of the reasons that the Muslim community is going to be so pivotal with the green issue in general is, so we're about 3% of the population, but the Muslim community is growing quite fast. And also, it's a very young population. So, you know, the majority, I don't have the statistics off the top of my head, but a vast majority of Muslims in general tend to be under the age of 40. So, you know, there's a big young population, and lots of them are very active, you know, and this is kind of energy and enthusiasm that we can really tap into. There's a strong diaspora connection. So if we're going to families and households, this is not only impacting our carbon footprint in the UK, but it's potentially impacting, you know, the carbon footprint in a lot of our kind of connection countries. There's a massive Pakistani population here, a massive South Asian population, a growing kind of African and Turkish community. And so there's a strong diaspora connection, and our change, our education and our campaign work here could really have a strong lasting effect elsewhere. And then lastly, I'll just say that there's a big religious incentive, because if you read through the Quran, right, the Muslim scripture, you will find it filled with analogies and citations and quotes about the environment, you know, examples kind of relating general life to the skies and the earth and the water that God sends down from the skies, and rivers underneath which gardens underneath which rivers flow. It's absolutely filled with telling us to look at the birds who are communities like ourselves, and kind of animal welfare and things like this. So although we use code words like sustainability and environmentalism and climate change today, with the Muslim community, lots of these teachings are within their scriptures, within their books. You know, it's just been called something else. And so that's something that we can really, really tap into. So all I'll say is our goal is to raise awareness of this issue, to empower young Muslims to lead on this issue, and to try and help people understand that this issue could be the single most important thing that we as a global community will have to face. So I'm going to end there, and hopefully in the Q&A we can discuss this some more. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Shehroze. Our next speaker is Pete the Temp. Pete the Temp is a poet, educator, human beatbox, and a loop pedal artist, which I'm sure you'll explain to us what that is. He has performed at over 20 festivals, and in recent years he has worked with the British Council and featured on BBC Radio 4, World Service and Newsnight. He has shared the stage with Stuart Lee and Bill Bailey, and also performed spoken word alongside the Pyro Circus rave band Slamboree to audiences of over 2,000. He is currently touring a one-man show, Pete the Temp versus Climate Change, which I think you're going to talk to us about as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Lovely to meet you all. Hi. Really interesting to be here and to be in a space where people are discussing new ways to communicate climate change. Is something that fascinates me massively, and I think the way that we get our messages out and the way that we tailor them is of vital importance. And I think these spaces... should we go to this one? And also really interesting to hear about the work that Made in Europe is doing as well. So I'll just tell my story, because that's the only story that I'm qualified to tell really. I'm a performing artist, as well as being an activist and an environmentalist, like we all are. So a lot of the work that I do is communicating these ideas in ways that are entertaining and funny and accessible. Climate change is perhaps the biggest abstract concept there is. We can't touch it, you can't see it, you can't smell it. How can we make it real for people? How can we make it tangible? So, as has been mentioned, I have a stage show called Pete the Temp versus Climate Change, which is a one-man spoken word comedy show in which the premise of the show is I single-handedly defeat climate change using only my mouth. And if you want to see whether I succeed, you can come along a week Friday. It's happening in Farringdon. I can give you the details later. This isn't a big elaborate plug, by the way, for my show. That isn't why I'm here. And in this show, I use projection and video and animation and anecdotes of stunts that I've done and actions that I've taken part in, and I do poetry in the effort to sort of communicate the different tactics that have been employed to tackle climate change and also to tell my story. So I've been grappling with this show for years, and it's developed, it's been a thing for a couple of years, and I've tried many things, I've got many things wrong, and I've been fascinated by the science of how we get these messages across, and I've explored, should we just focus on positive stuff? Do we need to go to the dark places? What sort of language is going to turn people off? And tailoring that to different audiences as I travel around the country, because each audience is different, right? So I've kind of come to the conclusion now that you need a mixture of all of them, and different people are going to be motivated by different things. Sometimes if you go too dark, people are just going to balk against it. You get this big problem of despair, which I'm sure people are people who are environmentalists come across a lot. People just throw their hands up in the air and say, climate change, what can I do about it? It's just too big. So that's something we have to be wary of, but at the same time we can't shirk the fact that we are living through the 6th mass extinction, the worst, most rapid mass extinction that's ever taken place on the history of this planet. It's happening in our lifetime, and by 2045 there's going to be no life left in the sea. We're living through an age of deep permeating death. Okay, so how to get these messages across and not just make people just want to walk out of the room. There is a book by George Marshall, anybody interested in this subject, George Marshall from the Climate Outreach Information Network. has written a lot about how we get these messages across. He talks about the Medusa effect. Medusa, the mythological creatures with snake hair, and when you look at her, you turn to stone. And he was saying similarly, when people look at how hideous climate change is and how big the challenge is, they just turn to stone and they can't do anything about it, they just freeze. Right? So he says we need to use the mirror, and this is how they defeated Medusa. Of course, they used the mirror so they didn't have to look her straight in the eye. So he said similarly, when we're communicating climate change, we need to look at it slightly obliquely and not just go full in with the full throttle kind of approach. And I think that's an interesting way of doing it. One of the central messages of my show is that we need to be taking action, just as our last speaker was saying, not just being passive citizens where we just give money through our bank account each month, but actually being active. And the action that I advocate is non-violent, confrontational, direct action. So being civilly disobedient and being an active citizen by misbehaving. And I truly believe that the best lawmakers are the misbehavers. And actually, if you look at the history of social change in this country and actually all the way around the world, the people with power and money have always blocked progressive social change. And they've been won by people who take to the streets and demand it and break the laws. You know, we wouldn't have. I mean, if you look at the end of slavery, the right to assemble in public, the right to free speech, the right to form trade unions, the right for women to have a vote, the right for women to go to university, civil liberties for minority groups, health, education, welfare. All of these things were demanded, and there was always an element of people breaking the law to get that. So one of my central messages, and I think this is a discussion for the movement as a whole, is that we need to be talking more about being civilly disobedient, and I think that is a positive thing. That act of protest is a healthy thing for society, and that doesn't. This often has sort of very negative associations. People are associated with criminality and negative things like that. And understandably, some people get quite scared by that idea. So what I try to do in my show is I try to show people that actually it can be something which is very innocent, very fun, is not harming anybody, but is actually a very effective way of showing lots of people that there are other people who care and are willing to take action and inspiring change. Some things, I'm just going to list a few things that have inspired me in terms of direct actions. The fracking, the big movement that's now taking place over fracking is actually the biggest grassroots movement this country has ever seen against the fossil fuel industry. It's happening across class boundaries, happening across geographical boundaries, and you've got Tory heartland areas in rural shires in this country where you've got people having mass demos, and you've got elderly people on the front line that have been dubbed the nanarchists, which I think is a nice term, and you've got people taking part in taking direct action out of desperation, and often people that you wouldn't expect. I was watching a video today by Greenpeace where they spent £45 on the materials to produce these pop-up signs. So on the podium of Formula One, when they're having the champagne and the big celebrations, these Shell signs pop up saying Shell Save the Arctic, because Shell is a sponsor of Formula One, so they created these sub-advertisement sort of posters that half of the Shell's logo has been turned into a devil's head, the other half has been turned into a polar bear. And it was just, things like that, a great way to humorously get across a message on the biggest PR day of Shell's year. It could just be small everyday things. I was sat in the tube last week and there was a Heathrow advert and it said Heathrow, expanding Heathrow will fund her future, and it had a picture of a young girl sat there in front of a desk, and the idea was that expanding Heathrow will mean jobs, growth, prosperity, and it's going to mean prosperity for younger, for educated girls. And somebody just crossed it out and put will pollute her future. And then I saw on Twitter the other day somebody else had written another one. What was it? What did it say? I wrote it down here. expanding Heathrow will cause somebody cross something out and put climate chaos. So these small actions, they do go viral. They do show people that there are lots of people out there doing things. And then there's more spiky things, such as sort of going to, one time I went to a careers fair put on by BP at Oxford University, and we staged a stage invasion and came on and took the mic off this guy who was trying to recruit all these young minds from Oxford University, and just came up and talked about the truth about what BP were doing in Colombia and Nigeria and other places around the world, and really embarrassed them when they'd spent thousands of pounds on renting out this big grand hotel to recruit people to come into their company. Another thing that I've been involved in is shareholder activism, so just buying a share in a mining company or an oil corporation, so that you can go to their AGM as a shareholder and then you can raise points, or you can stage something theatrical, like having a die-in and then theatrically dying on the floor, and whatever crazy thing you might decide to get up to. So talking about a direct action is one of the main things about the show, and I think I'm always fascinated by how different people will be turned on by different things, and I'm going to stop there because I think I've probably been going on for about 10 minutes. I could probably go on for about an hour and a half because I'm a poet and I like talking, so I'll just stop there. Thank you.
I think we'll switch over to now the two of you trying to inspire us with some spoken word and poetry.
Take the microphone, please.
Yeah.
Am I starting?
Yes.
Yes, Stacey.
It's completely up to you. Ready.
Let me take a few minutes of your time. I hope you don't mind. I just want to start some discussion. I got this feeling of sway because I might just stop and say I'm amazed by the world in all its glory. And the signs of our Lord make me praise Allah more as I watch the rain fall in the seas as it foams, to the trees on the groves, to the bees on the rose, to the sun in the sky and the world they enclose. Brings me to my knees every time I start to compose. I suppose I'm just a speck of dust in the grand scheme of things. I'm smaller than a fly. But it always begs the question, which of the favors of your Lord will you deny? And to think, Allah left me in charge of all of this beauty, to be His steward, subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be His Khalifa, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Although to be politically correct, maybe I shouldn't use that word. Vicegerents of the earth, and one day we'll be buried in the dirt, and it hurts me to think that even the so-called halal food we eat is barely on the brink of being war crimes to the animals we were sworn to protect them. Let's no longer deflect our problems on everyone else. Let's learn to accept them. Make a pledge to change. I'm not perfect, but I'm no longer deranged. My kids will one day feel the side effect of my action. And on the day of resurrection, I'll be asked about all my inaction. But I guess it's not my fault. It never is. It's those damn capitalists. How they've distanced production from consumers, so when I buy some clothes, sweatshops and workers' rights don't depress me. Where's the humor? Recycling global warming don't address me with those rumors. Eat less meat, be a man. But don't you care about your future? I'm sorry if I've depressed you and taken you out of your axis of comfort, but when Allah said Iqra, I assumed it was important. So I'm about to share one of my biggest pet peeves with everyone. The bottled water industry drives me crazy. Now, I ain't going to judge anyone, but it's something that really drives me crazy. Because you're going to go and pay about 80p for a bottle of water. Think about how much it actually costs them, and think about what the bottles are actually doing. 3 billion bottles bought each year in this island alone, just 1 in 5 gets recycled. The other 80% dump them in India and China because that's what they're entitled. Throw them in the oceans, driving whales and dolphins suicidal. Don't sit idle and try to change the world, spending hours watching the arrivals. Thank you, someone got that. We're in a golden age of knowledge, a scientific revolution. But sometimes it seems we're confusing showers with ablution. But none of this is new. Our own prophet came with the solution and led the change by spreading justice, ridding us of corrupt institution. So don't laugh when we talk of minimizing mass pollution. It's he who said removing rubbish from the road is a charitable contribution. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And why have we become champions of the all-you-can-eat dare? It's like we don't care what we eat or we wear. What happened to 1/3 of water, food, and air? I swear I need changing more than anybody here, so don't snare at me. Let's sow the seeds of change today, so just bear with me. Let's make a pledge to change, so who's here with me? So who's here with me? Okay, 2 people. Because we're not coming up with anything new. This ain't no bid'ah innovation. Our message dates back 1400 years. Quran, Sunnah, authentic narration. So why are Muslims happy when the world's in degradation? God's creation is suffering at our own hands. This is our invitation to show the world how Islam is nothing but glorification of Creator and creation. So let's start our own revolution before the price is paid. A revival of the love, hope, and justice our religion gave. The road is paved, don't be afraid. Through campaigns and education, we can start to persuade. Join the movement, be the cause, and follow the guidance of the greatest ever made. Join MADE in Europe. Thank you.
Awesome! What a great warm-up. Fantastic. I'm going to just carry on, I'm going to take that flame and just and keep it positive. I'm going to do one short positive one and then I'm going to do a silly one. This one is about food, about the global food renaissance, and it goes like this. There's a worldwide movement that's growing like buying weed through the rotting flower bed of industrial greed, through the hardened ground of this corporate winter. There's an unexpected item in the bagging area. Cultivated Cuban allotment plots, landless peasants of the Amazon basin, rooftop gardens of Colombian slums, millions and millions of Indian peasantry taking back land, taking back power, taking back land, taking back power, taking back land, taking back power. This is a staff announcement. No GMO, no to Monsanto and biotechnology, unlicensed restaurants of New York City, clandestine markets of central Italy. This is biopiracy in the right direction. Biopiracy in the right direction. Counterinsurgency seeds breed from the plottings of guerrilla gardeners that seek to weave a green mosaic into the fabric of this concrete metropolis whose pockets of growth, seized and squatted, turn towns into edible landscapes, turn towns into edible landscapes. This is a staff announcement. This processed food for thought's got us thinking globally, so we start to eat locally. We will be free range again, not battery humans, but locavores. Look, workers of the world unite. We have nothing to lose but our chain stores. What's underground will come to fruition if we water the seeds of our own ambition. The revolution will not be microwaved, freeze-dried shrimp packaged in plastic packaging. Welcome to free-range Britain, checking out of conveyor belt treadmill consumption, because eating is an ecological action, and that makes my plate political. So I'll eat the change that I wish to see, one meal at a time. Thank you. And then if I could take the liberty of doing another fairly short one, if we've got time, because I was inspired by what you were saying about giving to charities and just stopping there, and you were talking about that in the context of the Muslim community, and I think it's actually in the context of all communities in this this country. There is a tendency for us to be passive citizens by just giving. And I used to believe, I used to be in the NGO sector, and I used to believe that if everybody just gave a little bit of money through their bank account each month, that'd be enough. Somebody somewhere would do something with that, and everything would be okay. And I think it's similar, and this analogy has been drawn many times between, in the medieval period in this country, members of the nobility would pay members of the church to pray for their souls, and this they believed would nullify their sins and deliver them to heaven in their afterlife. And I think in a similar way, we're paying, but we're not actually changing. We're not actually being active. We're not going out. We're not campaigning. We're not getting in the way of power, or whatever it might be that we see as a good way of being active citizens. So this is a mick-take of the charity sector, and it's done in the form of a charity advert, and it goes like this. We interrupt this commercial break with an important Christmas message. Charlie has learned that nothing will change, whether he votes or not. A door, a police baton. When we first found Charlie, he didn't have a voice. All he wants is to live in a world free from war, injustice, and poverty. But we believe another world is possible. It's time to take action for change. This is why we are asking you to sponsor an activist today. Stanley Richmond works in a cement works. He gets a deep sense of personal satisfaction from exchanging letters with an activist that he has been sponsoring for 5 years. The activist that I chose to sponsor is called Marrow. I chose him because he's got dreadlocks. This is a photograph he sent me of himself de-locked to a coal-fired power station. I think it's important that these little soap dodgers get the chance to have a bath. At the end of the day, I have the knowledge in my heart that Marrow won't have to raid a skip round the back of Tesco just to put food on his table. Sponsor an activist is a registered charity case. We pride ourselves on keeping admin costs to a minimum, so your money gets directly to where it's needed, to the crusties. Set up a direct action, direct debit with Sponsor an Activist and get a complimentary all property is theft keyring. Just £5 a month could help provide an activist with a compost toilet in a commune or a squat. £10 a month could help provide an activist with soya milk for 2 weeks. Give an activist a D-lock and he can tie himself to a Harrier jump jet for a day. Give an activist a Harrier jump jet and he and his family can attack military installations for an entire generation. At the heart of Sponsor an Activist is the ethos of armchair activism, helping those who won't take action, because we believe that anti-capitalism begins in the home. And if everybody got somebody else to do their bit for them, the results can be amazing. So go on, just sit there and sponsor an activist today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we'll kick off the Q&A session. Does anyone have any questions, or I can kick off with the question. And if this was to do with Pete's bio, I'm just curious what a loop pedal artist is.
Oh yes, I mean that bio really, none of it really qualifies me to be here at all. But yes, I use a loop pedal. So this is one thing I have in my show. Loop pedal is a machine for recording loops, and then you record over yourself. So we'll start beatboxing, and then I might put down some guitars, and then I might start singing. So yeah, basically anything to make lots of noise until everybody's looking at me. Is, that's just another tool for me to do that.
Okay. Any questions from the audience? Yeah.
How would the mechanics again for the audience? the importance of transatlantic agreement, which actually basically try to paralyze all the movement to make any improvement to society, from minimum wage to fracking to whatever, the free hand to do whatever they like for the big business. And this is actually the basis for any strike.
Shall I, and then if you want to...
Yeah.
Yeah? So presumably you're talking about the transatlantic trade and partnership deal. I think that is the biggest threat to democracy, probably as a piece of legislation that we've seen maybe for a century, because it's going to take any power of our political leaders to actually make a difference on our own soil, away from them, because it's just corporations, transnational corporations, deciding how things in this country are run according to their market and their corporate principles, which are not in the public good. I think it's a very, very dangerous piece of legislation, and I think actually we're sliding towards, and I don't think it's even exaggerating to say that we are sliding towards corporate dictatorship in this country. I used to do human rights work in Colombia, and there you have a corporate dictatorship, and people often talk about the developing world as if they're catching up with us. No, we're going towards the same thing in Colombia, where they have, because of the corruption in the government, the corporate power has accelerated its hold over the country, and you have right-wing paramilitary militias who enforce the will of people with money and corporations. And I think that's where we're going. Look at London now. Look at how many new private security guards are popping up all over the place. Surveillance, tall fences, gated communities. I think we're going towards a situation with Colombia, and I think the transatlantic trade partnership agreement is one way where we're losing power, democratic power of the people to the power of the corporations, and very, very concerning. If you want to have anything to add on that.
No, I don't have anything to add on that, but let me just talk a little bit in general about the power that we have to change, because the thing is, as a community, as professionals, as activists, as people who are getting educated, or as general functioning members of this society, we all have a role to play in making a change, whether that's influencing corporate policy, let's say, by kind of climbing the ladder, being knowing about these principles and really trying to make a difference through that way, through trying to lobby the government through policy, because that is a power that we have. We are in a democracy. And so, let's just talk about the Muslim community. If we want to, really see a big difference, we need to, be active on these issues. And although, look, it is very arguable to say how much impact can we truly have in a world that's dictated by, the kinds of things that you were talking about. But at the same time, it's up to us to at least do what we can, do what's in our capacity. Because as Muslims, we believe, right, that change comes from Allah. So for us, it's not about the result, it's about the effort. The idea that should I recycle, or should I turn my lights off, or should I stop the water from running? Will that make any difference at all? That's irrelevant for a Muslim following the Islamic faith, because we don't do it for this reason. We do it because for the greater reason of pleasing God, because we believe the change will come from God. So we're going to do it regardless of whether anyone else is doing it, and that's the mechanism that we've been given to live our lives by. And that's the mechanism through which God will also make change, inshallah, because that's through where it'll start. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah.
Hello, just following up from that, gents. Quick about the TPP. So I work at Global Museum. and we recently had a seed festival, and there was a screening of a film called GMO, OMG, sorry, it's an anti-GMO film, and it showed how the TPP would basically make, so Europe and UK is basically much more resisting of stuff like GMOs than America, where the corporations, like you said, the corporate fascist control has a lot more control, and they dictate that a lot more. Do you think there's a danger if the TPP comes into effect that GMOs it's going to open the door for the corporations to say, yeah, we're going to stop, rubber stamping GMOs for consumption, and like in America, you're not allowed to label the GMOs. Yeah, you will be released on the public whether you want it to or not. Because there's certain people at the screening were saying there's a danger of that happening. What's your take on that one?
I think there is I'm no expert on the TTP, but there is a danger with these things if we allow them to happen, and this is the problem. I think one of the reasons why there's more safeguards in Europe than there are in America is because we have this tradition in Europe of social democracy, of larger government, more higher taxation, and a greater involvement of the government in people's lives, and greater regulation of things. And I think that's a healthier culture to be coming from than the system in the US, which is much more about individualism, private wealth, private power,
and corporate power.
And corporate power, yeah. And the modern corporation is much more of an American entity, I think. So, how is that relevant to us? I think we need to fight for the public sphere. We need to fight for the public good in whatever way we can. And I think community is very much under threat. And it's interesting, we're talking about faith here at this event. Faith is at the centre of community, and I say this as somebody who considers myself an atheist. I think modern Britain has lost its space. When we lost our churches, we stopped going to churches. Christians have lost their space of commune, and they've lost their spaces where they can come together and reflect together and talk together. And I think that is just one symptom of a very individuated and atomised society where people think they can't do anything because they can't do anything as individuals, and the collective union has gone, trade unions have gone, talking about faith communities, that's gone. So we feel very powerless, but of course we're not powerless because it benefits people in power for us to believe that we are. So we're made to believe that we can combat climate change by turning off lights and by doing the recycling. Personally, I not only find this boring, okay, it's important, yeah, but I find it boring and it makes me feel small and powerless. But when I go to a demonstration, when I come together with communities and I take action and I stand in the way of corporations and whatever stunt it's doing, I feel really, really powerful. And I think actually that is a very addictive energy to be playing with and coming together. And so I think they will get away with those things if we let them. But power, the way power works is it only functions when people are complicit to it. So if we, and I think this is the only thing that's going to stop corporations, we're talking about insurmountable power and corruption. I mean, the OPEC oil consortium, global oil consortium of OPEC, recently bought a huge area of Malawi and cut down loads of forests and built a mega hospital there, huge hospital that was so big that people were never going to use it, was never going to be used, purely because the area had oil underneath it. So they just built this hospital just so they could say, yeah, we're building a hospital. Well, really, they were just buying it so that they could access the oil. And when we talk about that level of wealth, that level of corruption, the only thing that we can do is stand up to it and use our power, and that's I think really have to do.
Do you want anything to add?
I'll just quickly say that. So I think, look, the corporate sector, and I'm not here to just kind of like hate on the corporate sector, but the corporate sector is by its definition profit-driven, and I think that's important for us to understand as well. But considering that we live in the same society and obviously the impact, political clout, and the decisions that are made you know, through the largest and most powerful corporations, have an impact on the rest of society, it's really important for us to be educated about these things. And so I think what's really, really essential is that we're conscious, active individuals, generally. We're living in an age where it's really easy to let's say, raise your voice, right? With Twitter, you know, you can put a black mark on an organization if you think they're unethical pretty easily. And you can see with like what Greenpeace is doing with Shell, and you can see generally through like campaigning organizations that it's not that easy to for anyone to make really detrimental decisions and for it to go unnoticed. You know, it is possible to kind of find out. You can these types of things, they will be available in this kind of day and age. You will have access to that kind of information. The key question is, what will we do about it? Will we kind of spread that information? Will we actively try to be educated about what's happening to our consumer choices? Like, what impact does what I buy have on the rest of society around me? Is that an action that we're willing to take? Are we willing to kind of spread that to our communities? Or, you know, like you said, take it, you know, a step further, public demonstrations, things like that. Or are we just going to kind of sit down, know about these things, or know that these types of things exist and not really do anything? So I'd say educating ourselves is one thing, and then I'd say campaigning organizations like ourselves and like other organizations, they need to do a really good job at you know, kind of raising awareness of these kinds of things. So I'd say, although, look, they're profit-driven, which means that they need an approval from the public, and if, you know, their reputation is really important to them. So I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah, go on.
Just, yeah, to an extent, definitely makes sense. But to another extent, if you look at this documentary called Food Inc., Monsanto, just coming back to Monsanto, like, even if, like in California recently, even if public opinion is against, you know, the non-labeling of GMOs, they've got fleets of lawyers. Do you know what I mean? They can just strong-arm their way, and then the people who are campaigning, they're like, you know, and then most of the people who are kind of like sheep or whatever, they won't know any better. But those battles that take place, the corporations have more resources, they have money, they've got millions of pounds of lawyers when they're shutting down the farmers, when they're prosecuting people, you know, with these GMO stuff. I keep talking about GMO, but you know, that's just one example. But the money they've got, the legal power they've got, it's huge, you know.
Yeah.
Yes, and also they bully farmers.
Yeah.
We will burn down your farms if you don't take our products, and it's happening in Canada.
And America as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think education is vital, but it's a foundation, it's a first step. And it's, you know, we need to be aware of what's going on. And then building upon that, we need to really think about what we can do taking things forward. If, for example, there's a particular organization that you have a problem with, there are kind of measures that, you know, you can take in terms of, you know, some of the things that Pete mentioned. Obviously, if it's an organization that you can encourage like divestment in, if you think that's what it needs. At the end of the day, look, you're right, there's a lot of power in organizations that potentially don't have the environment at the core of their interests. But one thing that's good about public opinion, swaying public opinion, is if public opinion's against you, in the long run, there's things that can come out of that. You can use that energy and enthusiasm to really try and you know, to try and make a change.
Just when I have conversations with people, but the thing is, it's not just they've got legalese, they've got huge PR as well. They can get certain umbrella organisations that are working for them to act neutral, like, you know, the Academy of Sciences, to say, you know, just a specific example, Monsanto, oh, you know, I've got a friend and he put this up on Facebook the other day saying, oh, you know, the Academy of Sciences said out of the 98 million hectares they planted GMOs, you know, no human health has been adversely affected, which, if you know anything about GMOs, that's fantasy, that's farcical, but because it's got the stamp of this scientific body, which they bought and paid for, that can sway public opinion. They go, oh, no, science says GMOs are completely safe, and actually it's, really not as clear cut as that.
And the
Do you know
many
what I mean?
governments,
So they can engineer public opinion just with, I'm not trying to be all doom and gloom, I'm just saying there's huge things that they can do and make somebody, look like, oh, you're a crackpot if you say this, because look at what the scientists are saying. But hang about, where's the money coming for those, organisations to say what they're saying? Like the BBC recently has, started up a lot of pro, GM propaganda again after 10 years where they kind of didn't say anything. But if you look at where their funding is coming from, you follow the money. But most people would just watch the TV and people are busy and, okay, right, scientists are saying it's all safe, let's go back to sleep. And that is how they will engineer consent.
Okay, we I think we've got another 10 minutes, so just wanted to check if does anybody have any other questions?
Yeah. What's your alternative to fracking? What do you think is a safe energy source?
Yeah, I think fracking is a money-making thing. It's a short-term money-making thing for a minority of corporate interests who have bought out the politicians. Is my opinion of it. I think it's a very destructive way to get at increasingly scarce fossil fuel energy, and what we've been shown by the experts is that the alternatives do exist. All the renewable energies do exist, and they've shown how we can make that transition. Not only that, but the majority of people in this country want to switch to renewable energy. They want an energy sector that is publicly owned, not owned by 6 corporations, because this is the reality of the matter. This is where these faraway corporations intersect with our lives is our energy bills, right? I mean, we've had our fuel prices have doubled in 6 years, and that's because there are 6 companies who own 99% of the energy market in this country, and they're actively lobbying against renewable energy because they're making so much money from selling us. They're making billions of pounds of profit from selling us oil that they've imported from the other side of the world. Fossil fuel energy is something that only some people can get, so we have to pay a lot of money to get it. If we have locally sourced renewable energy, then suddenly the corporations don't make any money, and fracking is one way they can continue to make huge amounts of money. So,
what do you mean by renewable? What kind of renewable?
So wind, solar, hydroelectric, thermal, tidal power. The technologies that exist, but they're not being invested in because there's too much money from going after something which is...
What about nuclear fuel?
Nuclear fuel is not actually a renewable energy because it's only a finite amount of plutonium in the ground. And that's got more controversial. I won't get into that whole debate because there's a massive debate within the environmental movement, of course, whether nuclear is a viable alternative. Some people say it should be dangerous. Some people say we need, it's a quick way of cutting our carbon emissions. But my point is that actually most people, at fracking demos now, people hold up signs saying Google fracking because anybody, with a computer will very quickly realise that fracking is a hideous thing, which is detrimental to health, water. We've got mini epidemics of cancer happening around this country now. This is like Colombia when I was out there. It's happening right here. The fossil fuel industry is in our backyard, and it's polluting the water, it's polluting the ground, and it's polluting people, and it's hideous, and we have to stop it. And I think it's really, really interesting now, the groundswell of people who are standing up to fracking is really exciting because again it's coming from all different backgrounds in a way that usually we associate climate activism as being kind of sandal wearing, quite academic, quite minority thing, but this is actually coming from lots of places all over the country, which is exciting.
Okay, I've got a question for so with all the campaigning work that you're doing with companies like BP and Shell, what is your ultimate objective? So they're going to continue digging for oil. There's a big demand for it. So what would you say you're trying to achieve by all this campaigning? Is it just trying to make it more difficult for them to do their business? What is the objective?
All of these companies, they rely on us giving them a social license to operate. And if we take the case of the tobacco industry, we knew that it was bad for a long time, but they had this social license, and then over the decades we've taken that social license away from them. We won't let them advertise on Formula One anymore. We won't allow them to. There's heavy restrictions on them. They've lost that social capital that they once had. And similarly now we're seeing really exciting initiatives to attack the reputation of these corporations who really care about how they're perceived. This is why they have multi-million-pound budgets for PR, is because they it's ludicrous. BP were the sustainability, one of the sustainability partners for the Olympics. They really invest huge amounts of money in this. They sponsor things like our cultural institutions such as the British Museum and the Tate Modern. There's been really interesting works, just small groups of people, just 3 or 4 campaigners getting together, doing a stunt that then gets in the broadsheets and really embarrasses one of the planet's biggest companies in a way that has really shaken them. And one of the people who is involved in this has been recently wrote an article I can't remember where it was, but she was talking about how she sent off a freedom of information request to BP, and they had to send all the documents that proved that BP was spying on her. They were actively spying on her. They were tracing her movements, her meetings, where she was going, what she was being involved in, and passing information to the police to try and to prevent the activities that she was doing, which were basically very colourful, very theatrical ways of embarrassing them, such as turning up to the British Museum, where the Viking exhibition is sponsored by BP, and having a Viking funeral and having a big Viking boat made of cloth where they all walk around chanting, and then they do theatrical ways of showing the death and destruction that the BP Oil Corporation is bringing to communities around the world. So small actions of small people do have a big impact, and they do really worry them, and I think that's encouraging.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question. If anyone has one.
What would be the 3 actions that we should take away from here today then, rather than just like inertia, which obviously is a risk? What will be 3 things that I can leave here with and actually, bring it to my life to make at least some sort of difference?
I think that's one for both of you.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think whatever way is meaningful for you to be an active citizen will make you more powerful. And I think just link up with people, link up with communities. Find what is relevant for you, find out what you care about, because it's a very multifaceted thing. Some people it's about conservation of animals, they're into animals, so they go out and they get involved in stuff like that. One of the most interesting things I went to recently was fuel poverty action, where I was talking about how fuel prices is something which is directly affecting us. Fuel Poverty Action are doing really fascinating work in making the link between the corporations who are perpetuating the problem of climate change and are also harming people. Actually, the most vulnerable people who can't pay their bills are being affected by that. And I think that's an interesting area of campaigning. Or it might be jobs. Climate change. Tackling climate change is going to create a huge amount of jobs. So whatever if you're lots of trade union bodies are now becoming much more involved in the issue of climate change, because housing, all of these things, producing the transition to low carbon economies, these create jobs. So whatever is relevant to you, really. I mean, there's a very broad spectrum of activities. Give me your email. I can send you the links to organisations. We can have a chat.
Nice one.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. Really good advice. I'd say the exact same thing. Get involved in an organisation, join a community, have people around you who are thinking and talking about the same kind of issue. That's really important. It's empowering, and it helps contextualize things, because when you're by yourself, it can seem really isolating with such an intangible issue per se. So although we can see the effects going on in the world around us, like you mentioned, Pete, it's sometimes seen as really abstract. So I think that's really important. Surround yourself by people, whether it's getting involved in an organization or a group. I'd say read about the issues, like become, you know, a crazy like bookworm. Constantly read like the latest research, what's going on, try and read about the solutions. I think getting educated for all of us, including myself especially, it's incredibly important, and that's what will keep our passion reignited. Because when we see the effects that it's actually physically happening, this movement's like physically making, I think it's really, really essential that we all know about it and that we can all tell the people around us. And then just on that part, I'd say do your part to actually make whatever changes you can. Green issues or environmentalism, it's extremely broad. Like you said, I mean, there's 1,000 things that you could choose to do or choose not to do, which could lead to a greener life. And for everyone, they'll have their own priorities, their own struggles. But I'd say, and this is advice that I give kind of like from within the Islamic tradition, which is because we're kind of based on the, like our motto is Allah does not change the condition of a people till they change what's in themselves. I'd say changing yourself is really, really key. And you can see when you're not practicing what you preach, there's no way that real change can come. You need to, you know, be the change you want to see, to like, quote Gandhi, good old Gandhi. So I think, yeah, those are the 3 things I'd hope that you take away from this, and me too.
Can I add one last thing?
Yeah.
When I said earlier that this wasn't an elaborate plug for my stage show, it's not. One tangible thing you can do is come to this show a week on Friday, found in the Free Word Centre. I've literally got 4 flyers. I'm kicking myself I didn't bring more, but come and grab me if you want the details of this. This is going to be a beautiful night. I'm doing a double header with Danny Chiver's show, Arrest That Poem. It's all about, also about direct action and climate change.
Danny's been a city stepper.
He's been here already, yeah. He's great, Danny. He's had a very interesting life. He's been up to the top of gas-fired power stations. He's been spied on by the government, and he's been sued £500,000 by corporations. And he tells these stories in his show, and it's and hopefully these shows will inspire you to go out, and we will Fuel Poverty Action will be there with information, as well as will the UK Tar Sands Network, another organisation that's working on climate change. So we're going to get a lot of energy together, and we're going to be coming and laughing together and talking and sharing ideas in a funny way. So that's one tangible thing you can do. I think coming together, and I think it's interesting here, you know, we're talking about the Islam faith. One thing that inspires me about Islam is how solidarity is so central to it as a faith. I used to live next to a mosque, and I would hear them raising thousands of pounds in a single evening for a community on the other side of the planet. I think coming together in communities and just feeling part of something bigger is so vital, and this is a nice example of that. This is lovely. Here we all are talking about the things that we care about, rather than sitting in front of television going, oh my God, the world's doomed. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Pete and Shehroze. Could you please join me in thanking our 2 speakers? If you have time, I think, are you able to stick around for another 10 minutes? And,
absolutely, yeah.
I know some people were asking how can you get involved. You can have a chat with Pete and Shehroze. What we'll do is we will put up the information for your show on our Facebook page, so please join the Facebook page to the City Circle, and the video should be up on our website as well. So thank you for coming along. We'll see you next week.